We have covered a lot of really interesting points about how our personal narratives work, but it can be hard to remember these points later when we're helping someone else. So I have a simple way to remember them in a mnemonic. Simply remember the first 5 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E. Each letter reminds us of 2 key points. If you can see my image of going on a quest to the top of a mountain on a postcard, then these reminder letters are in the top left-hand corner to prompt us. The A reminds us to ask good questions. 6 good questions we can ask to begin with are, what do you want? Or, what are your best hopes for your preferred future? Here we are identifying and agreeing how someone would like their life to be better in the future in some way. It could be to get a home if you're homeless, or a job, a better job, friends, a relationship, or to learn a new skill. It could be anything, a quest. The picture language metaphor for this quest on this image is the top of the mountain. That represents what we want to achieve, what we want. Then we can ask, what and who helps? We can ask what and who is in the way or is getting in the way on your quest. What emotions get stirred up? How do you feel when you go on this quest? And we can ask, what's the story so far? And what are the next steps? Answering these 6 questions starts a co-creating or co-editing process where we get a rough sketch of a quest that the person we're talking with, would really value achieving. A quest that has real meaning to them and value. Each letter reminds us of 2 points, so the letter A also reminds us to ask additional questions. We can ask, is there anything else in any of the 6 areas just outlined? Such as, is there anything else that might help you on this quest? Or anything else that's getting in the way? Or are there any other emotions that are getting stirred up by going on this quest? Such as guilt, shame, fear of failure, or joy. We might enjoy going on this quest to some extent. We could ask if there's anything else that you could tell me about what achieving this quest would be like for you in the future. Who else might notice when you achieve this quest? What might they say or do differently, this other person, if you achieve this quest? This is asking about what you could call an outsider witness question. For people's journey of life, we can imagine who would notice if we actually achieved this apart from ourselves. And this can enrich and help us to have a stronger sense and remember this quest and why it's worthwhile to imagine this and to talk about it. We can help to build a richer picture by asking additional questions in any of these 6 areas. The next letter, B, reminds us that there are often bigger or smaller stories connected to the quest that we've outlined, any quest to achieve something. A qualification quest, for example, may be linked to a bigger employment quest to get a job. This may be linked to even bigger stories in our life, like a quest to fulfill a family role, like being a mum or a dad, or to care for a grandparent. So we get the qualification, we might get the job, we get a bit more money and income, and we can fulfill a family role. So there might be bigger or smaller stories around any particular quest that we talk about. Because bigger quests are linked to what we value. They have power and they can motivate us to go on and to put up with the difficulties of completing these smaller quests, because we can remember, we really want to do the bigger story that we value. Now, the letter C reminds us that our personal stories are connected. Sometimes our stories complement each other and they motivate each other, like the example just given, where getting a qualification quest might then lead to an employment quest. So there are complementary stories, but sometimes the opposite is true. The C can remind us that we sometimes have conflicting personal narratives or stories. Whilst part of me may believe a story like I'm going to fail, at the same time, part of me may also believe a conflicting story like I'm going to succeed on my quest. I can do this. Believing 2 conflicting personal narratives at the same time is very common. Conflicting stories stir up emotions of inner conflict sometimes within us. Sometimes these personal stories that we believe about ourselves are generated outside of ourselves by other people and institutions in our society. Might tell a story about us that we then go on to believe. These stories circulate around in our culture, opening up a dialogue about the conflicting narratives we partly believe about ourselves can help us to push out of ourselves these untrue and unhelpful personal stories. Talking about them can help this. Constructive conversations can also help us to pull into ourselves to strengthen and embed those personal stories that are true and helpful and the ones with a positive go-ahead plot. We can, by talking with people, we can pull into ourselves the positive ones, and we can push out of ourselves the unhelpful stories, the untrue ones. Once we stop believing a negative personal story about ourselves and push it out of ourselves, it has no power over our life. Then the letter D in our mnemonics reminds us that the stories are important to us because they define us. Our personal stories shape our thoughts and feelings and our behaviour. They shape our identity and sense of self. The other D is that there's a danger in a single story. Stories can hold us back from fulfilling our full potential, and many stories are oversimplified stereotypes about someone. Some stories dangerously limit and entrap people. The letter E reminds us that we co-edit and co-create our personal stories all the time through conversations and actions. When we actively listen well and ask good questions, we can help co-edit someone's story. We may practically help someone on their quest as well, but sometimes we do experience things that are puzzling and confusing to us. We try to edit or fit these experiences into stories available to us in our culture to try to make sense of them, to explain them. Like when we have a headache, we may be puzzled about that, and we try to fit the experience into a story about being dehydrated. But if it doesn't make sense, we might disbelieve that and try to fit it into another different story available, like having a headache is because we're in a stressful situation. And that may or may not be true, but you see how we try to fit our experiences into available narratives. We are always already engaged in this process for ourselves to some degree, and other people are engaged in this story, in this process, trying to fit experiences of thoughts and feelings and behaviours that puzzle us into stories that are available to us in our culture to make sense of them. Sometimes we suggest a narrative explanation to someone else to consider during a conversation in the hope that it may help them to make sense of their confusing experience. And that's the A, B, C, D, E mnemonic to remember the key points about personal narrative.